He lay motionless beneath the soft white sheets, the faint rise and fall of his chest carefully measured, every breath controlled as if it were part of a rehearsed performance. The private hospital room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of machines and the distant murmur of footsteps in the corridor. Alexander Cole had mastered control in every aspect of his life: business negotiations, public appearances, even personal relationships. But this was a different kind of control, one that required complete stillness. His eyelids remained shut, lashes resting against pale skin, his face drained of its usual sharp confidence. To the doctors, nurses, and visitors who came and went, he was unconscious, suspended somewhere between awareness and sleep. In reality, his mind was sharper than ever. He remembered every detail of the moment he had collapsed in his office: the concerned shouts, the hurried hands, the flashing lights. He had allowed the rumor to spread that stress had finally broken him. He had allowed them to believe he might not wake up soon. It was the perfect opportunity to observe without being observed, to listen without interruption, to discover what people said when they believed power could no longer hear them. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant mixed with the lingering trace of his expensive cologne, a reminder of the world he usually dominated. Somewhere outside, a nurse laughed softly, unaware that the man she thought helpless was cataloging every sound. Alexander's thoughts drifted to the countless people who surrounded him daily: assistants, executives, advisors, each one polished, polite, and carefully guarded. He had always suspected that loyalty faded the moment influence weakened. This test was cruel, perhaps, but he told himself it was necessary. He needed truth more than comfort. The door opened quietly, and footsteps entered with hesitation rather than confidence. Alexander recognized the sound immediately: Emma Reed. She moved differently from the others, as if she never wanted to disturb the space she occupied. He felt a strange tightening in his chest as she approached the bed, stopping just close enough that he could sense her presence. She didn't speak at first. He imagined her watching him, taking in his stillness, the machines, the sterile calm. He wondered what expression crossed her face when she saw him like this, stripped of authority and armor. Emma had worked for him for years, efficient to the point of invisibility, never asking for recognition. He had noticed her more than she realized, though he rarely acknowledged it. Now, as she stood there, her breathing uneven, he sensed something different: fear, maybe, or something heavier. She shifted her weight, and he heard the faint rustle of fabric as she reached into her pocket. A phone. His mind sharpened. This was what he was waiting for. This was why he lay here pretending to be lost to the world. Emma glanced toward the door, then back at him, as if making sure she was alone. Her voice, when she finally spoke into the phone, was barely above a whisper, yet every word landed with startling clarity. "I'm here with him," she said, and the way she said it, soft, unguarded, sent a ripple through him. He remained perfectly still, forcing his body to stay relaxed while his thoughts raced. This was the moment where masks slipped. This was the moment that would confirm everything he believed about people. Yet as she continued speaking, there was no trace of calculation in her tone, no careful corporate language. Only worry. Only something raw and human. Alexander focused on not reacting, on not letting the sudden tension in his chest betray him. He had expected confessions of greed, of plans, of quiet relief. He had not expected emotion. The hospital room, once just a controlled environment for his experiment, suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. Emma took a few slow steps toward the window as she spoke, her words tumbling out as if she had been holding them in for far too long. Alexander realized, with a quiet shock of his own, that whatever he was about to learn would not fit neatly into the conclusions he had prepared. The game he had set in motion was already moving in a direction he could not fully predict, and for the first time in years, that uncertainty did not feel like weakness. It felt like the beginning of something he had never allowed himself to experience before. Emma's voice trembled as she continued speaking into the phone, pacing slowly near the window while the city lights outside blurred into streaks of white and gold. "They say his condition is stable, but no one can promise anything," she whispered, pressing her free hand to her forehead as if trying to hold herself together. "I keep thinking, what if he never wakes up?" She paused, listening, then shook her head slightly. "No, it's not just about work. I know everyone assumes that. But it's not true. Alexander lay frozen, every muscle disciplined into stillness. Yet inside him something stirred uneasily. He had heard countless people discuss him over the years, analysts speculating about his decisions, rivals dissecting his strategies, but never like this. Never with this kind of vulnerability. Emma leaned against the glass, her reflection faintly visible in the dark window, her shoulders tense. "You don't see the side of him I do," she said quietly. "Everyone thinks he's cold, but he's just alone. He built walls so high that no one ever bothered to climb them." Alexander's heartbeat quickened, and he silently thanked the machines for masking any change in rhythm. Hearing himself described that way felt like standing naked under a spotlight. Emma took a deep breath, her voice lowering even more. "I was going to tell him. I swear I was. I just kept waiting for the right moment. And then this happened." She stopped pacing, her footsteps fading into stillness. "I didn't want him to think I stayed because of his money. I didn't want him to doubt me." Alexander's thoughts spun. Tell him what? The question echoed in his mind, growing louder with every second. He had designed this test to expose betrayal, but now he was trapped in suspense, clinging to every word like a man eavesdropping on his own fate. Emma's tone shifted, thick with emotion. "Do you remember when I told you about my father?" she asked the person on the other end. "He was sick for years, in and out of hospitals, just like this. I learned how fragile everything is. That's why this scares me so much." She swallowed hard. "I never meant to cross any line. I care." The final word lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. Alexander felt his throat tighten. Care was not a currency he understood well. In his world, everything had a price, a motive, a return on investment. Yet this sounded like something that couldn't be measured. Emma wiped at her eyes, unaware of how exposed she was becoming. "If he wakes up, I'll tell him the truth," she said with quiet determination. "All of it. Even if he fires me. Even if he never wants to see me again." Her voice broke, but she didn't stop. "I just need him to know that someone saw him as more than his name or his bank accounts." Alexander's mind reeled. He had never realized how desperately he needed to hear that, or how unprepared he was for it. The silence that followed was thick, interrupted only by the distant hum of the city and the steady beat beside him. Emma ended the call slowly, her hand lingering on the phone as if reluctant to let go of the support it offered. She stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, composing herself. When she finally turned back toward the bed, her face was calm again, professional, almost detached, but Alexander knew now that it was a mask. She stepped closer, adjusting the blanket near his shoulder with gentle care, a gesture so intimate it made his chest ache. "You always pretend you don't need anyone," she murmured softly, believing the words would dissolve into unconsciousness. "But you do. Everyone does." She sat beside him briefly, her presence warm and grounding, then stood and quietly left the room. The door clicked shut, and Alexander was alone again, staring into darkness behind closed eyes. His test had revealed something far more dangerous than disloyalty. It had revealed truth, and it shook him to his core. The hours after Emma left stretched endlessly, the kind of time that felt thick and heavy, pressing down on Alexander's thoughts until sleep became impossible even with his eyes closed. The room dimmed as night settled fully, shadows crawling up the walls while the machines continued their steady, indifferent rhythm. He replayed every word Emma had spoken, each sentence echoing louder than the last, until they no longer sounded like overheard fragments, but like confessions meant for him alone. He had orchestrated this deception with cold precision, convinced that revealing people's true intentions required removing his own presence from the equation. Yet now he realized how flawed that belief had been. Truth did not always emerge from fear or opportunity. Sometimes it surfaced from love, from vulnerability, from the mistaken belief that no one was listening. Alexander felt a dull ache in his chest that had nothing to do with his physical condition. It was the ache of recognition, of seeing himself through another person's eyes and not entirely liking what he saw. He had spent years cultivating an image of self-sufficiency, believing that dependence was a weakness others could exploit. Emma's words had stripped that illusion bare. He was alone, not because people failed him, but because he never allowed anyone close enough to stay. As the night deepened, nurses checked his vitals, doctors whispered updates, and still he lay unmoving, trapped in his own experiment. Each time someone entered the room, he wondered if Emma would return, and with that thought came a surprising sense of longing. When she finally did, just before dawn, he sensed her before he heard her, the soft hesitation in her steps unmistakable. She paused near the door as if bracing herself, then approached the bed quietly. Alexander's heart raced, and he fought the urge to open his eyes immediately. He needed one more moment, one last confirmation. Emma sat beside him, exhaustion evident in the way she slumped slightly, her professional composure worn thin by worry. She spoke softly, not into a phone this time, but directly to him. "I know you can't hear me," she said, her voice rough with fatigue. "But I need to say this anyway." Alexander's pulse thundered in his ears. "I don't regret working for you," she continued. "Not even on the hard days. You gave me a chance when I had nothing but determination and debt." She let out a shaky breath. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being just a job. The words settled over him like a weight and a gift all at once. Emma's hand hovered uncertainly above his, then gently rested against it. The contact sent a jolt through him, and he had to concentrate to keep his fingers still. "I was afraid to tell you because I knew how you'd look at me," she said quietly. "Like everyone else who wants something from you." Tears slipped down her cheeks, landing silently on the sheets. "But I don't want your money. I want you to know that you matter, even if you never wake up to hear it." That was the moment the test became unbearable. Alexander realized that continuing this charade would no longer reveal truth, it would only cause pain. The power he had wielded so confidently now felt cruel. Slowly, deliberately, he allowed his fingers to move, just enough to curl slightly against her hand. Emma froze, her breath catching sharply. She leaned forward, eyes wide, searching his face for any sign of change. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, hope and fear tangled together in a single word. Alexander drew a careful breath and opened his eyes. The world rushed back in. Light, sound, emotion, far more intense than before. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as tears spilled freely now, no longer restrained. Relief washed over her features, followed quickly by panic. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out. "I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have said." Alexander tightened his grip on her hand, grounding both of them. "Emma," he said softly, his voice hoarse from disuse but steady. "Don't apologize." The silence that followed was charged, filled with everything that had been left unsaid. He searched her face, seeing not an employee, not a subordinate, but a woman who had shown him honesty when he least deserved it. "I heard you," he admitted quietly. Her eyes widened, color draining from her face as understanding dawned. For a moment, fear flickered across her expression, and she began to pull her hand away. Alexander held on gently. "All of it," he continued, "and it changed me." The confession hung between them, fragile and raw. In that instant, Alexander knew that whatever happened next, the man who had pretended to be unconscious no longer existed. He had awakened in every sense of the word. The room felt different after that, as if the walls themselves had shifted to make space for truth. Morning light filtered through the curtains, pale and tentative, illuminating the lines of worry still etched on Emma's face. She tried to stand, instinctively retreating into professionalism, but Alexander's hand remained lightly around hers, not possessive, just enough to ask her to stay. "Please," he said again, softer this time, and she nodded, sitting back down as if her legs no longer trusted themselves. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The machines continued their steady rhythm, but now the sound felt less like a reminder of fragility and more like a marker of continuity, proof that life was still moving forward. Alexander broke the silence, choosing his words carefully. He told her why he had done it, why he had allowed the world to believe he was unconscious. He spoke of years spent doubting every smile, every kind gesture, convinced they were all investments waiting for returns. He admitted that he had wanted confirmation that people would reveal their true selves when power was stripped away. As he spoke, shame crept into his voice, because hearing his own reasoning aloud made it sound colder than he had ever intended. Emma listened without interrupting, her expression a mix of hurt and understanding. When he finished, she let out a slow breath. "You were testing people," she said quietly. "And you tested me too." The words weren't an accusation, just a fact, but they landed heavily. Alexander nodded. "I did," he replied. "And I'm sorry." The apology surprised even him. It was the first time he had offered one without calculating its consequences. Emma looked down at their joined hands, then back at his face. "I was scared," she admitted. "Not because you heard me. Because I thought I'd lose my job for caring." Alexander shook his head slowly. "If there's one thing I learned from this," he said, "it's that I don't want to lose the people who care when there's nothing to gain." Her eyes softened, and in that moment the distance between employer and employee dissolved into something more human. Over the next hours, doctors came and went, surprised by his sudden improvement, attributing it to rest and timely treatment. Alexander answered their questions, signed forms, played the role expected of him, but his attention kept drifting back to Emma. He noticed how she anticipated his needs before he voiced them, not out of obligation, but familiarity. When the room finally emptied, he turned to her again. "You said you would tell me everything," he said gently. "If I woke up." Emma hesitated, then nodded. She spoke of the nights she stayed late to finish work so he wouldn't carry the burden alone, of the quiet pride she felt watching him build something from nothing, of the loneliness she recognized in him because she carried the same emptiness after years of survival mode. She confessed that she had begun to imagine a life beyond spreadsheets and schedules, one where honesty wasn't a risk. Alexander listened, not as a man in power, but as someone finally allowing himself to be known. When she finished, he didn't respond immediately. He simply held her gaze, letting the weight of her words settle. "I don't know what this becomes," he said at last, "but I know I don't want to go back to who I was." The days that followed were filled with quiet changes rather than dramatic declarations. News of his recovery spread quickly, but Alexander refused the usual parade of visitors, choosing instead a small circle of people who had shown up without expecting anything in return. Emma remained by his side, sometimes as his assistant, sometimes simply as a presence that made the room feel less empty. When he was discharged, the city looked different to him, sharper and more alive, as if he had been seeing it through glass before. Back at the office, he made decisions that surprised everyone, promoting people who had worked in silence, restructuring priorities to value time and trust over relentless growth. Rumors circulated, of course, but Alexander no longer cared. He had learned that the most powerful revelations happened not in boardrooms, but in quiet moments when defenses fell away. One evening, long after the office had emptied, he stood by the window with Emma, the city lights reflecting in the glass. "I pretended to be unconscious to see the truth," he said thoughtfully. "I didn't expect it to wake me up." Emma smiled, a small, sincere smile that held no fear. "Sometimes," she replied, "the truth finds us when we stop pretending." And in that moment, the shock that had begun in a hospital room transformed into something lasting. A life reshaped not by wealth or control, but by honesty finally allowed to breathe.